there's something societally that's challenged about the way of men, and I use that term consciously. We've thrown the masculine baby out with the toxic bathwater, if that makes sense. We were like, man, a lot of guys do really bad stuff. And I was like, I know. Like, cool, everything male bad. Oh, wait a minute. Wait, that may be an overswing, right? I always tell the story of when the APA came out with some guidelines about what like traditional masculinity is toxic, because it implies stoicism, it implies leadership, it implies risk-taking, and it implied one more thing. And that article like flew around the internet of like, yeah, wow, the APA actually says that like traditional masculinity is toxic. And then lo and behold, like all of California caught on fire. And what did we do? We sent thousands of stoic, risk-taking leadership males and some women to go fight the fires. And there was not a single parade in front of the fires with signs up being like, end toxic masculinity, turn around firefighters and go home. And so here's the conundrum. We need a certain part of the population to be willing to take risks, to be willing to protect, to be willing to fight for us, to be willing to kill if needed, to die if needed. But yet we're going to shame the rest of the group because of this confusion we have about the smaller part of it.
Welcome to the Global Affair podcast, brought to you by Love Out Loud, the world's largest love-based movement, actualizing a civilization of love by 2030. My name's Nicole Gibson, and join me and some of the world's brightest minds as we bring some of the most important and controversial conversations of our time into a space of unity. It's important to know that as your host, this isn't about my personal opinion or bias, but rather an opportunity to listen with love, honesty, curiosity, and reveal the true universal experience us humans have amongst the differences. So if you love the show, please let us know by giving us a rating and tell us how to make this conversation easier for other people to jump into as well. And with that, let's get it. Trav, welcome to the Global Affair.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. As mentioned in our lead-up conversation, I've really been waiting to have this conversation with the right leader, because I feel in the world, globally, gender identity, specifically masculinity, I feel like it's been under the gun in so many ways. And I think this is one of truly the most important conversations we need to have, because it vests so solidly on our broader identity as humanity, for men to know their place in the world, for women to know their place in the world. And I think in so many ways, this conversation's become convoluted, it's become loaded. And I'm really excited to get to the bare bones of what you witness in your really important work. So I'm grateful that we get to have this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. It is an important conversation. A lot of the planet is male, and a lot of people listening, if they're male or not, love a male. When I first started this, Nicole, it was men reaching out, right? There were two camps that were reaching out, three camps, let's say. Men who were like, thank God, I wanted to feel the energy behind a masculine movement that had both power and heart. I could find one or the other. That was like the binary that they had before. That was group one. Group two were the people who are we allowed to swear here?
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
This is candid space.
Go fuck yourself. How dare you work with men? How dare you speak to men? How dare you help men? Men are the problem. We should be talking to all of the victims of the problem. That was the second camp. Then the third camp was
from women.
From women.
Yeah.
The third camp was in secret. It was women, it was mothers, it was sisters, it was wives, it was daughters saying, I'm not allowed to say this publicly. I just got chills again. But thank you, because my brother's struggling. My husband's struggling. My dad is struggling. I'm watching my son struggle. And I'm not allowed to say, hey, he needs support, because I'm rah, all pro, boss babe, the future's feminist, whatever it's going to be. And so publicly, I'm not allowed to thank you, but thank you. And I remember being in that position and kind of being thrust into this position and not quite knowing how to handle it. Of going like,
Mm.
okay, cool, thanks. Why don't you just talk about this stuff publicly? And to the camp that's telling me to go fuck myself, at the time, it was a bit abrasive of like, actually, fuck you too. Now it's like, you know what? I get it. I have empathy for you. There's a reason why you're as hurt as you are, and it probably has a man behind it. And I'm not going to deny that.
Mm.
But it doesn't take away from the importance of the conversation. And it doesn't take away from the importance. My first mission was to build a movement of 1 million men who express their masculinity through both the primal and the divine, to have power and love. And I was like, that's where I was 5 years ago. A year ago, it switched. And we said, cool, we're going to keep that because it's on some t-shirts. But here's what we're going to add. What we're really after is removing or getting rid of as much of the unnecessary suffering in men, comma, so that we can eliminate the suffering caused by men, which
Mm.
is there's a lot. There's like, I'm the first person to raise my hand and be like, oh yeah, we are doing good things in the world, but a lot of the bad things in the world, we lead that team. But I want to do it in an effective way. I'm an
Mm.
acupuncturist. I want to go for the root of the issue as opposed to running around putting band-aids on things that we're just going to switch topics between. So yeah, this is a really important conversation. Thanks for opening it for me.
Yeah, so much to dive into from even your opening share. About, I think it was maybe 9 years ago, I was introduced for the first time to rite of passage work. And my mentor at the time, Dr. Arno Rubinstein, I did his rite of passage training, and he introduced a model to us, which was the psychological shift between girl and woman and boy and man. That historically, through millennia, we've had proper rite of passage, facilitated initiations by the elders of a community that support that transition during a coming of age. And we're meant to, as part of our maturing and our development and our responsibility to the broader community we're a part of and the world, move through these psychological evolutions. And I remember being I think I was 21 or 22-year-old female, really thinking that I was a woman. I was, a few years into my adult life. And I remember looking at that list and just thinking, I am still a girl in so many ways. And being confronted by that. And on the outside, I've been a business owner since I was 18, and I've been supporting myself for as long as I can remember, very independent. But some of these deeper psychological shifts that are required to really step fully into healthy adulthood, I didn't even know that they existed. I didn't even have a frame. And I know for many of the men that I did that training with, they had a similar realization that they were still boys. And I think this would be in a really incredible place to begin our conversation today. From your experience, what are these shifts? And how is it that, for the most part, we have 50-year-old men and women in positions of great influence a lot of the time and power that are still, in so many ways, children? And what do we do about that?
What do we do about it? This is a bit above my pay grade, but I'll just throw in, we replace them with people who've been initiated. And that is all we can do. Or we recognize first the power that we've given children in adults' bodies. And that is who is running the country. I'm in America, right? Look at our political system. It's children on children. And I don't care who you voted for. Donald Trump is a giant child, right? He is the spoiled child archetype, if we just want to keep it archetypal. Truly. Look at so many positions of power. Look at heads of companies, right? And we don't check and balance them by saying, hey, when you come of age, when you transition from boyhood to manhood, to speak specifically about men, you are responsible for the tribe. You are now part of the tribe. Your job is to be of service to the tribe. Your job isn't specifically to just be of service to yourself. You are responsible for all of you're not responsible for the things that happened to you leading up to this point. But until you go through this initiation from boyhood to manhood, you will be reactive because of them. You will be reactive because of your traumas. You will be reactive because of your wants and your adolescent desires. Now, when you come through the transition, we're going to sit you down and say, hey, your job now is to work through those. We'll help you. We're not just going to throw you out in the woods and be like, cool, unfuck yourself from all the shit that happened to you. But it is your responsibility.
Sometimes that's needed.
The beauty of a men's community or a men's group is that it takes initiated men to look at men who are going through the initiation or are freshly through the initiation and say, I know where you are. I see you. Now, what we used to say is that go on, fuck yourself. Now what we're going to say is, hey, we're going to hold you and be here with you while you do that. That's the difference, right? I have a great teaching partner, Michael Gay, who says there's some things that are too heavy to put down yourself. And a lot of men are walking around with things that are too heavy to put down themselves. But they don't have anybody else who's conscious enough, who's healthy enough, who's integrated enough to say, hey, I can hold that with you. Like that would be a game changer in the male world. Unfortunately, we do, and we have expectations on men, heavy expectations. However, very few men have been given the job description. So we say like, hey, you got to know how to do this. You got to figure this out. Here are the secret expectations we have on you. Here are the overt expectations we have on you. Oh, by the way, your natural inclination to actually meet them, we're also going to shame that and call that toxic. So we're in this really weird conundrum with men. In every single statistic, I used to joke, and I don't know if I can still do this, and say every statistic that doesn't have to do with breasts and ovaries, men are leading. And every single one of those was negative, from suicide rates to addiction rates to prison rates, domestic violence rates, assault rate, you name it. We're at the top of it. And so there's something fundamentally off with our society and the expectation and how we treat men. And I know people are hearing this and may go, poor fucking men. Boo-hoo. Like, you guys created the system. You guys live under it. It's your thing. If you want to change it. It's a little disingenuous. It's a little bit, we can't do that. We need to look at that individual and say, hey, what's happened to you? What are the expectations on you? How can we as a community help you? Yes, we want you to stop doing the shit that you're doing. But now we need to support you into growing into the person who won't do that stuff. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I want to go into the role of masculinity in our world and how it's changed and the subsequent effects that's had on men. I think that's a really important thing to explore. And I know from my own work in mental health, my own understanding of mental health, we do have a crisis of male suicide. That's every 40 seconds in our world, someone is taking their own life, and that statistic swings to the side of men. Although more women attempt suicide, it's just unsuccessfully. So I think that maybe says something about the difference in nature and how men and women handle emotion and how maybe difficult it can be with the societal pressures on men to ask for help when help is really needed. I also find it very fascinating that less men than ever are having sex in our world, especially young men. I think that is quite indicative of something deeper there. And I'm sort of curious to hear your take on what's happening to the men in our world. You said something that was very impactful before we began this conversation, which is you hearing the echoes of many men that you've worked with saying, I don't want to be a man. Yeah, let's talk about that.
There's so much. I taught a class last night on what I believe is a different paradigm of sexuality, and 50 guys showed up for it. And it's not often where you can do a free call about sex and have men show up, because the implication is that there's something yet to be learned, right? And that's sometimes an egoic hurdle for some people.
Yeah, it's a
But
psychological barrier. Yeah.
right? I was like, I get it. 49 of you are just here to make sure that the information I'm putting out is correct. Thank you for joining. Let's rock and roll.
You're here
But
for a friend,
right.
taking
The
notes.
curiosity was there. I think there's for a certain swath of the male society, there is an intelligence that we know, like, hey, this ain't working. Like they get that. My cousin committed suicide 2 months ago. Male, my
I'm sorry.
age, 2 kids, did not reach out.
Mm.
Right? It's like it's in my blood now to talk about this and work with this. The challenge, though, Nicole, if we look at statistics, is the vast majority of men who take their own lives have reached out in the 3 months prior. They've
Mm.
gone to therapy, they've contacted a group, they've had a conversation with someone close to them, and yet they still don't see another way out. So the mental health system needs to
Yeah.
get turned upside down. I have a great mentor named Dewey Freeman, who is a 73-year-old therapist and of like a freak equine therapist. He's just like a savant. He's been teaching for a lot of his life. And he says his goal is to uncivilize the therapy world and that it often doesn't fit for men. And so when I hear this and I see the
Mm.
statistics, we're not meeting men where they need to be met. We still are under a bit of the perpetrator victim paradigm of like, if there's something wrong with a man, he needs to fix it. If there's something wrong with a woman, we need to support her. And there's a
Mm.
bit of that. We haven't really quite gotten to where, the humanity of men. But I think this
Mm.
is all intertwined of not wanting to be a man, not feeling powerful in that position. The sexual aspect to me is fascinating, not because I really care how many guys are getting laid, but because I really deeply care about everything that goes with that
Mm.
connection, relationship, intimacy, love, laughter, creation, body accept, like evolution, expansion, you name it. We're in a conundrum. We're in a real conundrum.
Mm.
The guy I mentioned before, Michael Gay, my teaching partner, said he's done decades of wilderness therapy and went to a like camp, for lack of a better term, and they asked the kids, put yourselves in groups by gender, female, non-binary, male. And he said the smallest group by far was male. And there were
Wow.
little boys who were scattered and like didn't want to come to that group and like were like, eh. So there's something societally that's challenged about the way of men. And I use that term consciously. We've thrown the masculine baby out with the toxic bathwater, if that makes sense. We were like,
Mhm.
man, a lot of guys do really bad stuff. And I was like, I know. It's like, cool, everything male bad. Oh, wait a minute. Wait, that may be an overswing, right? I always tell the
Mm.
story of when the APA came out with some guidelines about what like traditional masculinity is toxic because it implies stoicism, it implies leadership, it implies risk taking, and it implied one more thing. And that article like flew around the internet of like, yeah, wow, the APA actually says that like traditional masculinity is toxic. And then lo
Mm.
and behold, like all of California caught on fire. And what did we do? We sent thousands of stoic, risk taking leadership males and some women to go fight the fires. And
Mm.
there was not a single parade in front of the fires with signs up being like, end toxic masculinity, turn around firefighters and go home. And so again, here's the conundrum. We need a certain part of the population to be willing to take risks, to be willing to protect, to be willing to fight for us, to be willing to kill if needed, to die if needed. But yet we're going to shame the rest of the group because of this confusion we have about the smaller part of it. That makes sense?
Yeah, totally. Trav, I think about this a lot in my own contemplations around gender identity. And I do totally acknowledge from a female perspective that there is a deeply ingrained desire. When I imagine myself in a life or death situation, I have two older brothers, they're my only siblings. I think about us as a family unit. I would, in that kind of situation, look to them to be the buffer between me and danger. And yet at the same time, I think there's been emotional danger that I've protected them from that they don't have the eyes to see. So I think one of the things that I come to in that contemplation is that we're not necessarily living in an environment anymore where that immediate risk and confrontation with death, where the masculine has been called on, that's not so present. And so we've almost disregarded the place of that, which in turn rejects a fundamental part of, as you say, the male humanity, which is really important because there's always going to be a need for that place in our world, but it's almost like out of sight, out of mind, because a lot of the women in the world don't feel like their life is in danger day to day. It's hard to acknowledge the deeper primal layers. And my work with people, by no means has it been female or male specific. It's been holding humans in this deep place of often shame, vulnerability, the things that are the hardest, as you say, to put down. And I think we have a crisis in our emotional capacity as a species to go to those deeper depths with each other. And in turn, we've rejected our primal nature, which I think has created this manifestation of superficiality and taking everything on face value and the 0.2 second attention span. All of these things have accumulated and cut off these fundamental parts of our humanity. And it's really interesting from your perspective to hear how that's affected men, because I can actually see how it's affected women as well in very different but equal ways. And I think part of the healing is to bring what isn't seen into the light. And for us as well to actually acknowledge these parts of ultimately our own humanity that have been rejected within the existing societal constructs.
Yeah, for sure. I love it. My head is spinning. You know, I read a book early on in my own journey of exploring this stuff called The Way of Men, written by a really interesting guy named Jack Donovan. And he said, this is what masculinity is, period, effing period. Imagine living in a village and hearing 500 yards out in the jungle, like the snap of twigs, the war cry, and knowing, like, okay, the other tribe is going to come and kill us. The innate desire for the men to rush forward and protect the gate. This was his wording. The innate desire for the women most likely to scoop up the children and run and be somewhere else and look after them. He's like, that going to the front gate and the protection and the fighting and the killing on behalf of the village, that's masculinity. And I remember thinking, even uneducated in this space, thinking, there's more to it. There needs to be more to it. And here was my portrayal. I was like, I agree with you. And here's what's missing now in 2023. What happens after the battle? What happens to the guy? Do the guys get together and say, John, I just watched you kill someone. Are you okay? Stuart, I see your legs broken and you're bleeding profusely and you just lost your best friend. He died. Are you okay? And that coming together of the men to say, hey guys, we just went through something together that's extraordinary. We're not going to go outsource this. We're not going to bury it. We're not going to drink it, smoke it, and fuck it away. We're going to sit in the circle here. We're going to scream. We're going to cry. We're going to laugh. We're going to do what we need. And we're going to get healthy. That to me was a more complete, that was what was missing in that definition. Now that's a hard sell. We talked about guys not having sex. That's a hard sell to a 15-year-old who really wants a Bugatti and a supermodel girlfriend and to be Andrew Tate, right? To say, hey, guess what? There's an emotional intelligence that's required of you right now. Because my girlfriend upstairs, to this date, we've been together for about 3 years, has not needed me to protect her from lions breaking into our house here in Colorado.
As much as I'm sure you'd love that opportunity.
It would be the best, right? I'd sit around and like,
that is your day.
Yeah. Like, I train jiu-jitsu every day to choke a fucking lion. Like, please let it come.
To save my girlfriend.
So far, I've like gone and closed a garage door. Like I've stopped the dog from trying to kill a bunny. She doesn't need that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that if she did, that I don't have the ability. So there's two fronts on this. She doesn't need that, but I need to be able to know how to do it. And I need to be willing to do it. That's, to me, the definition. Like, we have a slogan in the nation: let others be safe, for I walk among them. Doesn't mean that I run around with like a superhero t-shirt and like a gun and a spear and protect everybody. But I know if something happens, I'm going to be going forward towards it. That's a motto for our guys.
Yeah.
But here's what she does need. She actually does need me to fucking hold space for her. She needs that same warrior energy to go, you know what? I got this. You're going through some shit right now. Okay, you got some stuff coming up from childhood. I fucking got you. And what I've told men is it's the same damn energy. It's the same willingness to step into the fire. And like, I've worked, Nicole, with like the highest level of military dudes you can imagine. And they will say, doing the work around shame, doing the work around guilt, doing the work around childhood trauma, doing the work around PTSD is exponentially more difficult than breaching a door and going into enemy territory. And so when I tell guys like, hey, you are needed. This is one of the problems. Like, we've told men for 30 years, 40 years now, we don't need you. I grew up with a poster in my house saying a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. Right? That was, as a child, I remember looking up at that and being like, fish don't need bicycles. Right? And so it's like, it's in the psyche.
Where did that come from?
I think it's a Gloria Steinem quote. It's like a famous feminist saying. My mom was deep in that world.
Right. Yeah, I want to go into that. That's super interesting to me.
Right? Super interesting. We don't need you. We don't need you. We don't need you.
Yeah.
That's not true.
Yeah. I really, like, I want to take a minute to really honor what you're sharing. I was asked by someone recently in the conversation, Nick, do you feel like you have anyone that is really there for you? And it was interesting, as you're reflecting, I'm thinking of this, and immediately my response to her was, I know that I have men in my life that if I ever needed serious protection, whether that's someone hungover about me, God forbid, or some serious protection, that no questions asked, I could call them at any time of day. And they would be there for me. And that truly brings me this deep sense of comfort. And relationally, intimately, I date women, right? And still, what I gain intimately, like my choice in that intimately, is there's deeper levels of emotional presence that, for me, I can't not have in an intimate relationship. I'm so deep and I'm so sensitive and I'm so complex that without that, it's really impossible for me to open up romantically. And still, in that question, my mind went to, these are the men in my life that when it really came down to the wire, I know that I could call them at any time. And I don't know if I could say that about any female in my life in that same way.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Damn. When my life fell apart 6-7 years ago, my two best male friends were like, well, when do you want us to get on a plane? Right? That was like immediately one phone call. When do you want me to get on a plane? There's something, I think, innate. I don't know if it's testosterone. I don't know what it is, but there's something innate.
In
men. Right? I remember watching a video in London a couple years ago of some jackass like randomly running around like trying to stab people. And it was like 8 dudes just converged on him. Granted, he was a him, but 8 dudes were just like, nope, we're not having this. And boom, pounced on him. And they waited until the police came. And there is something in our psyche. And it's not just a superhero archetype or like, sweet, this is going to get on YouTube. I guarantee you those guys were just like, this isn't okay with me. We're going to stop this. Unfortunately, the balance of that, the flip side of that is 99.9% of people running around stabbing people are guys. And so I think that's the conundrum.
Yeah. We can't compare in these ways. I think that's the That's where so much of the toxicity, and that's my intent for sharing what I just shared. It's not a comparative place. And I think the fight, this kind of global fight that's existed between genders, I'm really curious to hear your experience of growing up with a mom who identified strongly in feminism. It's like the conversation around equality, I think we're trying to have it in the wrong way, because I think that there's a difference between equal human rights, which actually women have needed to advocate for on a lot of levels.
Many places in the world, yeah.
Right, exactly. And that's valid. And I don't think we should be having this conversation in a binary way, that in order to bring some of these conversations to the forefront, we're dismissing the need for equality of human rights and dignity and representation. That's super important. But I think as a world, we have this kind of really unsophisticated way of having these very nuanced conversations in this black and white tone. It's like everything that's happening with the loud advocacy of the LGBTQ community, I find myself, and this is me being totally transparent, really conflicted, because I remember myself growing up and thinking, wow, I would watch shows like The OC, and I remember when Alex and Marissa kissed for the first time, and as like a 12 or 13-year-old, I was like, oh my God, like I exist, because there was no representation in media. But now it's like the pendulum has swung so far the other way. This is another example, I think, of how we convolute these conversations, when actually we need, in the conversation around masculinity and femininity and men and women in the world, I think we need to separate equal rights from, well, what is really the place and the value, because each of us need a place of strength, to exist in the world from a solid foundation, a North Star to move towards, to know what it means to be a better woman, to know what it means to be a better man. I think that's so crucial. And I would argue your point that many women that are trying to say we don't need men aren't at the same time volunteering to take those traditionally masculine roles when it really comes down to the wire. And I think there's got to be humility in that. There's got to be a reverence that I know the men in my life deeply crave. And maybe it's because of my sexuality, I'm so able to give that to men, because I don't feel like I don't need that. So I can be a sister in that way.
What if we just celebrated our differences?
Yeah.
I think that's where the pendulum swung too far.
Yeah.
Right? If you and I were hired to work for a company and they said, okay, we need someone who's going to feel on the deepest emotional level possible.
Yeah.
And we need brute strength in the other position. And they're like, okay, the HR department has said we don't have enough women in the brute strength department. Nicole, you're in. And they're like, Traver, in the emotional department, we need like a bald dude. So like, go fill the thing.
Yeah.
Our company wouldn't be very good. I don't know how strong you are.
Yeah. Can give it a go. I used to powerlift.
There you go. Okay. This isn't the best example. I will not be leading.
I still wouldn't want to take you on. Even with that in mind, I'm not interested in taking you on. Yeah.
And I have a deep emotional capacity.
Yeah.
I've gone to therapy. I've done hundreds of workshops. I've held men as they wailed and screamed and cried. I can hold exquisite space. I go through about 1/100th of an emotional range that my partner does on any given Tuesday. That's it, right? And yet she has yet to open a jar of pickles in 3 years. So we can joke about it, but look at I'm naturally different. She's naturally different. You and I are naturally different. And we've muddled this together again and said, they're different, but parts of them still are undeveloped and unconscious, which is true. Totally. I put my hand way up. I've said from the beginning to men, we need our own feminist movement, because what I watched and grew up hearing about in my home was women stepping into spaces that were traditionally male, going through all the shit of being there and then thriving. And to me, that's the outer world was our world. The business world was the masculine space. So I say to men, we now need to enter the emotional space and go through the
Right.
same challenge. This is
Yeah.
uncomfortable. I don't like it. I feel like I'm going to die. People aren't nice to me. This is really, really, I don't want to be,
Rejection,
but I'm going to
judgment.
sit
Yeah.
here until I get on the other side of this threshold and I am a more
Mm.
complete man.
Yeah.
That to me makes a lot more sense than shaming me for having natural aggression and
Mm.
shaming you for having an
Totally.
emotional capacity that's far beyond what I'll ever experience. Now,
Mm.
if I'm using that aggression in a very toxic manner, fuck yeah, put me down with it. Put me,
Mm.
show me where my plate. Like I that's not acceptable. I don't know
Yeah.
what the female equivalent of that would be, but either way, like if we're
Well,
hurting people,
yeah, I think the theme there is a female equivalent societally. It's like if the female is feeling unseen, if the female isn't feeling safe, the lengths a female will go to often to test,
mm,
to manipulate, to coerce in order to try to get back a sense of control or power. And that's evolutionary from my perspective because we didn't have the strength. We had to figure
sure,
it out. We had to figure out alternative ways to, and I think that's why the nuances of what makes a woman are often very mysterious and unknown to man because it's not overt a lot of the time.
right?
But that plays out too. There's a lot of that within the female world. And I think what you're touching on is so important that until we get to a place where we're really able to be present with pain, each other's pain, but it begins with our pain. This was the source of the origin of my mission in the world from a very young age, going through anorexia nervosa and seeing the way, because it was outward, because it was actually physical, I got to see, whether man or woman, people's reaction to vulnerability.
Mm,
That the second they started to interact with me, it was like that's their relationship with vulnerability. That's written all over their energy, all over their face. And through that experience, I learned that we have a very damaged relationship with vulnerability both ways that inadvertently creates a rejection of others' humanity around us because we will do anything in that space to not have to acknowledge the vulnerability that's present. And that taught me so much about where we're at emotionally in our society, because it's so difficult for so many people to stand in front of someone who is experiencing pain
mhm,
and calm down their own nervous system and just say, I see your humanity. I see you. And I remember giving a seminar on suicide many years ago when I was doing a lot of work in mental health. And I was talking about these topics, and I had a parent stand up and have basically a breakdown. She was yelling at me, a mother, saying, "You don't understand what it's like to get home and your child is bleeding on the bathroom floor. Like, you don't have a right to be teaching what you're teaching." And I just stopped for a second and centered myself, and I really took in her pain. I really felt what that must be like as a parent. It's unimaginable. Like, I'm not going to be able to imagine that unless I've been through it. But I was present with her, and then I just reflected back. If someone I loved was standing on the edge of a building about to jump, and I ran up to them fanatical and was saying, "Don't jump," and I was adding fire to a very already tense situation, what would the chances be that energy would actually provoke them even further to jump? Alternatively, could I have a depth of acceptance, which is almost inconceivable to many, to approach that situation and say something to the effect of, I know you really want to jump right now, and
mm,
I can't make that choice for you. But what I can do is offer my hand. And if you take it right now, I promise I'm going to be present with you through this process. To not try to cut off someone's sense of agency. And I did a lot of advocacy over my years as commissioner and as an entrepreneur in mental health around seclusion and restraint, which I think was such a manifestation in our mental health system of this very core issue that we're touching on, which is because we don't know how to acknowledge and be present with this depth of pain without cutting off someone's sovereignty, which to me is the worst thing you can fucking do. And I know how that is in a man when you take away his sense of agency, when you take away his sense of free will. I've noticed what that does to the masculine, and I've also noticed what it does to the feminine. It has different expressions, but it's equally as fucked up. And to me, the solution is being strong enough and overcoming the level of kind of taboo that comes with an acceptance. Like, I'm going to face this pain head on in the eyes, and I'm not going to try to take away someone else's choice, but rather just be there with them. That is a serious edge for so many people in the world.
It is the biggest edge, right? I think that is the root of so much relational challenge. It's hard to stay relational in the face of your partner's pain, right? And for men, since we're on that topic, it oftentimes takes another man to be able to hold that same level of intensity around it. There's a softness to holding a man while he's screaming, but there's also a strength required that he needs to like push into and feel like this will not collapse. No one in your life, in your city, in your country has been able to look you in the eye and stay with you as you release this. Us 16 guys, we're not fucking going anywhere. So let it out. It's up to you. That's when I see men melt. That's when I see the depth of hell come through their stomachs and out their mouths. 2 days later in the workshop or in the event, that guy is going to look completely different. His face will reorganize itself. His body structure will reorganize itself. His laugh will change. His voice will deepen. Just the release of that. But I think we got it. I don't know if we got it wrong, Nicole, but what we got was men outsourcing the work that needed to be done with other men, mostly to their female partners who were ill-equipped to handle it. And it wasn't their job. Right?
And testing them most likely unconsciously to see if they can be unbreakable. Because for a female who's in that with a male partner, they want to know that when I'm crazy through pregnancy and sleeplessness with a newborn, that you're not going to fucking break. And I think maybe a lot of men don't understand that's very innate. I even do that with the men in my life sometimes. And it can be deeply unconscious. So I think because that's not understood, if a man's looking for that level of support from their partner who's coming at them with that kind of lens, that just creates such a depth of not being seen both ways.
Exactly. The first time I met Dewey, who I mentioned before, the 70-year-old therapist, he's also an equine therapist. Wow. And he took me up to meet the horses at his house. And the very first thing he said, I was like trying to walk a horse around a stable and I wasn't doing it well. He goes, horses need two things. They need to know that they're safe and they need to know where they fit in with the pack. And I went, well, fuck me right in the ear. I don't think it's just horses. That sounds like everybody. And so what we're speaking to, I think on the larger level for men and for women and for anyone in between, are you safe? Do you feel safe in this culture, in this society? And do you know where you fit in? And as the masculine question has gotten jostled, a lot of guys don't. They don't know where they fit in. And unfortunately, then this leads to the upcropping of very troubled ideas of the Andrew Tates of the world, of the very, very radical traditional religions that say, like, the dude is the everything, the woman is to follow. And you have a bunch of guys like, well, that sounds great. Right? I know where I fit in and I'm safe. Hey, can we sign up for your little club? Thanks.
I wouldn't call these clubs little, but yeah.
Yeah. right?
these,
Your
these
worldwide
thousands
gang.
and thousand years old. Yes.
Yeah. But it makes
Yeah,
sense why these more radical
totally.
ideas then come forward, and even
Mm,
why a lot of women will support them, even though scores and scores won't.
clarity.
It's like,
Yeah.
I know the role, I know what I'm doing. So I
People
think
want to be safe. Yeah.
they
They
definitely
want to
want to be
know,
safe,
they
right?
want to know where they stand. Mm,
And the male job title hasn't been well defined. Like, the core of my work is saying to men, your new title has some of the old stuff. Yeah, we want you leading. We want you taking care of shit. We want you, if something goes wrong, handle it. We want you knowing how to change a
mm,
tire and how to cut down a tree and how to bench press. That stuff's awesome.
mm,
And here's the new part of your title: emotional intelligence, EQ, relationality, an understanding of your feminine partner if you're in that type of relationship. You know what, guys? You're going to have to understand their cycles. Why? Because you're in relationship with them. You're going to
yeah.
have to understand the feminine. It's no
Otherwise, they will
longer
make
this,
you understand.
right? There's no longer this compartmentalization of like, well,
Mm,
I do this shit and I don't come home and talk to you about this, and you do this and you don't have. There's been this intertwining, and we're just a little bit behind the curve because of, and we're staying behind the curve because of a lot of mixed messaging.
mm,
Like, that's what I'm trying to cut through and give guys an example that says, like, yes, I got a 450-pound deadlift and I can choke the shit out of you. And I have no problem crying in front
mm.
of my partner. I have no problem holding her as she cries. I'm not going to be like, stop that, calm down, you're being crazy, right? Like, none of that. And to the world, have the same reverence and say, hey,
Mhm.
I am here for a mission. I am here for a purpose. And it doesn't mean that I get to be an asshole. It doesn't mean I get to be exploitive. It doesn't mean I get to take advantage of anybody who's, quote, weaker than I am. That's the old way. And our relationships, here's a big piece. They've stopped being based on transaction, right?
Mm.
We haven't
Yeah.
figured out how to be relational. So now we
Mm.
have these two camps of like, I see this every day on social media. Woman posts a
Mm.
video, I'm done dating, I'm done with men, 72,000 comments from women. I'm with you, sick of
Yeah.
them, fuck them, rah, rah, you go,
Yeah.
sister, like, you're living your best life. But the flip side of that is the next video is a dude who's like, I'm fucking sick of women. I got taken to the cleaners by my women, just want money. Women are hypergamous. Women just do this. And then there's 72,000 comments from dudes who are like, get your passport, bro. You're doing great. Just live your best life. And I look at both, right, and go, oh, you guys dropped out of the transactional relationship game. It didn't
Right.
work for either of you. But what you
Mm.
want, what you desperately fucking want, but you won't admit here on social media,
Relations.
is
Mm.
relationship,
Connection.
connection,
Mm.
contact, togetherness, unity, building something together, a communal effort. But you don't know
Mm.
how. You're still stuck in the, well, I paid the rent, so you owe me sex, or I did this, I took the bathed the kids, so you do this, as opposed to,
Mm.
hey, what are we going to build together? What are your strengths? What are my strengths? How do we support each other? Okay, you're having a bad day, I'm having a good day. Let me take the load. You're having a good day, I'm having
Mm.
a bad day. You take the load, right? We actually have a
Right.
common thing. We have support. We understand each other's ways of being in the world. That
Mm.
hasn't fully emerged. So the
Yeah.
dropout is the old way doesn't work, but we don't know the new way yet.
Interesting. Yeah. I think the roles from the perspective of people in same-sex relationships, this is always really noticeable in hetero couples, even when we see like men and women flirting at a bar or something, it's so obviously transactional.
Right.
It's like they're just fitting a role. And I guess in a same-sex relationship, everything's up for negotiation because we've never been taught by society, this is what you're going to do and this is what you're going to do. And this should be this is only missionary or whatever. Like those rules just don't exist, right? And
Yeah.
also for people my age, marriage wasn't an option until we got older. So we grew up thinking marriage is off the table. So it's really just about love. So we had this openness. Everything was relational. Everything needed to be a conversation. And I
Right.
think that's probably why the queer community is so fucking outrageous because it was like everything was relational. So there's no parameters. Yeah, but I think that there's something to be said for that, because by the time you define someone that you want to pursue a relationship with, there's often very intentional kind of points of discovery, whether that's your dynamic in how you are going to keep a home together, whether that's sexual, whatever, you've got nothing's assumed.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really beautiful thing in a
Mhm.
relationship.
Yeah. I would love to see, especially in America, like the idea of relationality, if that's the word, or like just being relational, make its way back into the sexual sphere,
Mm-hmm.
into the relationship sphere, and into the communal sphere. We talked about men not having sex, I think because the transactional paradigm has been left, but a new paradigm hasn't emerged.
Yeah.
So you actually do have a very small amount of men statistically having transactional sex with a lot of women who then get disappointed by the transactional nature of the sex and drop out and then get replaced by somebody else. And a number of men who go, wait, this person who I can actually have relationship with is going to call me into a relational frame, but I don't know how to do that because that's not on like my $9.99
My
late
list.
night, right? And that's scary. That requires me to actually show
ambiguity.
some emotion
Yeah, this is too ambiguous.
and feel. So I'll drop out too.
Yeah.
Or and I will also drop out and be 80% satiated by transactional sex on my computer. And I think that's another big
Crazy.
piece of the puzzle. Or I'll text, right? It won't be relational though. And then all of this swirls together. And actually the
Interesting.
thing that troubles me is that like it hurts people.
Yeah.
People are lonely. People aren't having friendships. People aren't having relationships. People aren't communal. And that leads to isolation, and that leads to an extension of every statistic that we hit on in the beginning of suicide, of addiction, of alcoholism, of depression, of all the things. It adds to that. And so we're in a conundrum.
That's a really interesting point. What has driven the levels of porn addiction in our world? That's potentially its own podcast, its own conversation. But yeah, I'm sure that there's men in our community that are listening to this and probably relating to a lot of what we're talking about. And I think this would be an interesting thing to explore. As I know,
We can dive into it if you'd like. I can talk.
Yeah.
This is such an odd statement. I'll say like I can talk porn all day. It's fascinating because here's my fear. I said this 5 years ago. My fear is that when VR and robotics catch up with each other, you will have the end of relationship.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing that men are mostly tasked with: the pursuit of the relationship. So your average 22-year-old dude has been rejected a number of times. He may, and let's just say like at a bar on a Saturday night, may approach 8 women just to strike up conversations. And 7 of them ignore him. One of them talks to him for 2 minutes and then goes back to her friends. Nothing wrong with that. That dude's been rejected 8 times in a night. Now, that same dude goes home, fires up his
AI girlfriend who was never rejected.
Right?
It's always there. Any time of day.
Anytime. So so that's a big part of it. Also the novelty of like, wow, I can
anything you want.
Anything, anytime is a big part of it. It's also
however I want them to look, however I want them to behave, act. Yeah.
Right. No risk, immediate self-gratification, perfectly designed probably by kids from MIT to make it like as stimulating as possible. And it doesn't require any of the realness of sitting down across from an actual human being and navigating the organic experience that is sex. The nerves, the anxieties, the what if it doesn't work? What if it works too fast? What if all of the things that also have a deep ramification for that guy. So if we're talking men specifically, I know women have an entire other set of ramifications that he just doesn't have to deal with.
Mm.
Now, a
For
lot
women,
of
there's
us,
no risk of pregnancy.
no risk of pregnancy. There's no risk of anything.
Yeah.
But there's no reality to it. There's no energy to it.
It's
There's no
fucking terrifying.
relation.
I can't,
Right?
yeah. It is so important that I think men and humanity at large get connected to the importance of struggle, the importance of challenge, the importance of pain, the importance of basically all the spectrum of the human experience that through a virtual simulation could be taken away, which in turn cuts off this natural design that the seedling has to struggle to get through the fucking soil. This is it's an organic process that, to me, how I've known in the times I've fallen in love with someone is because we can be in that space of this is so uncomfortable and awkward and vulnerable, and you're in it with me. You're bearing that with me, and you love me and I love you. And that's the beginnings of the sweetness of that. And nothing can replicate that.
It is the sweetness.
Yeah.
My partner, Katie, when we were first dating, sometimes she'd just go like, I'm getting hot. And she would like fan her shirt. It was the most endearing. I fell in love with that. And I'll tell you, I don't watch porn anymore, but when I did, at no point was one of the
did you ever feel that
actresses like, oh, that's so
this is so sweet.
Make love to the plumber. Amazing. Look at you. Oh, this is gonna be great. But my fear is for the younger guys here, right? Like I grew up with like one VHS tape that got passed around the entire high school that you had like your week with to go look at. And that was it. That was porn. Now it's everywhere. And I'm not 12, 11, 10, getting that imprint of like, oh, this is how you have sex with a woman. This is how you please a woman. This is what sex is, right? It's this horrible. So imagine 4 years of just watching anything you want, everything that you want, whenever you want, and then going out on your first date with an actual human who has her own story, her own history, her own life, her own being, her own insecurities, a body that's not pixelated, right? It has sounds and smells and tastes and design and like her own thing. I get why a lot of guys also then drop out because they're like, wow, this whole thing this is too much. Right? This is going to kick your ass a bunch of times, bro. But it's real. I think what you said is the most important, like, but that's real because you don't get the endearing sweetness of someone going, I'm hot. When, if you're not willing to go through the, like, I'm sorry, I don't think you're the right guy for me 10 times. And like the rejection and like, oh, fuck, I really like her, but she's dating so-and-so. Like the realness has been stripped. And I do think for a lot of men, period, the lack of reality is crushing a lot of them. We need to be in nature. We need to be in struggle. Right? I remember an early Marine Corps ad. This was like from the 50s, I think. And it was like 3 lines. Like, your time will be miserable, you will be underpaid, and it will be the biggest challenge of your life. It's like, dude,
join us.
How do we do this? Like
marching towards the opportunity.
I faked my birth certificate so that I can come do this. Like, give me something real. Right? Give me something real. And I know Boyd Vardy speaks about this with like, we need to feel like we are actually a part of nature. Or we get all discombobulated and fucked up over it.
I just want to really drive this message home because it is such a deep message in my heart. And I'm so happy that this conversation has led to this because I think it really is. This understanding will be the saving grace of the future of humanity in so many ways for us to not give up what's organic and to not try to divorce the very things that make us beautifully, imperfectly human. That matters so much as we go through this advancement. Even in the work I'm doing in technology every day, You see it, like the risk of convenience. I got my final manuscript for my next book yesterday, right?
Congrats.
And thank you. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
opened it up and I was like, oh my God. And, after that moment of like, oh, my artwork is there,
Yeah.
I actually had this sad thought that followed it, which was like, this could be the last time there's a piece of art that I've given everything to in such an analog way because of the world that we're moving into. And of course, that's a choice. But as an artist, as an entrepreneur, as a man, whatever the kind of sphere is, the lens is that you're looking through, we're moving into a time where the acceleration of what was real being replaced with efficiency, being replaced with speed and convenience and ease. There's this risk that we lose the soul, because every time I went to write a page in that book, it was like the art to me, which I hope the reader feels when they read my art, is that day I really didn't fucking want to. That day I wasn't sure. That day I felt like I was a shit writer. That day I felt really inspired. That day I had a conversation with a stranger in the coffee shop and I ran home to get that one paragraph written because it was the light bulb moment that I knew was going to finish the chapter in the perfect way. Like, we can't lose that depth of our humanity through these times. And I think we're seeing a lot of symptoms of this in our world.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, we're losing our souls.
Yeah.
We don't want to say that. I read an interview by a guy who was like editor for Surfer magazine for like 40 years. And he just wrote a book. And they asked him, like, well, why did you write this? He said, because in about 5 years, I think people are going to stop actually writing their own books. I know. And as a writer, I was like,
same.
But I'm gonna keep writing.
I'll do it. I'll spend the 12 months doing it when everyone goes away for a weekend and gets ChatGPT to do it for them. Like, yeah, I'll go through the struggle. I know. And there will be this separation, I think, of, like, my friend calls them the free range organic humans, as the transhumanists. And I think we can find a way to exist very beautifully and synergistically in the advanced civilization we're moving into, as long as we don't lose touch with the value of these other things. Because there's some things I feel we shouldn't automate. There's a lot that we should. A lot of the things that take us away from our creative spirit and our soul. Let's automate those things so that we can spend more time. Let's have the protection of our humanity be the thing that we automate around, so that we get to have more time in the soul, rather than it being the compromising of the soul. That's the vision I have, Love Out Loud has, that I want to make sure that all of us in our own ways are pursuing. And I think a part of that, and a part of the intent of this show, is to highlight the variance in how this is manifesting symptomatically in our world, and to get really present to how important it is to protect the masculinity in the world, to protect the femininity in the world, to protect the sacredness of struggle, not unnecessary suffering. But just like every time your 10-month-old goes to take a step, you're scared that they're going to fall on their face. You're not going to run over to them and pick them up every single time, because they'll never learn to fucking walk. You're going to watch your baby and be like, oh, it's going to hurt me so much to see them fall over again.
Yeah.
But the joy you get when they actually take their first step, and how happy that makes them, let's not lose those moments through these times.
Yeah. Think of the joy of your book.
Yeah.
Like that, I do not ever want people to lose.
No.
Or the joy of relationship. There is nothing, I don't think, ever I've experienced on my screen the same as like walking down the street holding hands with my partner.
That's right.
I don't want the Matrix. I don't want the, like, you can have a simulated girlfriend. No, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't want that.
There's no paradise backgrounds on my laptop that can replace walking through Armageddon in the streets of San Francisco, no matter how picturesque the virtual. Sometimes I need to go for a fucking walk outside. It's like, regardless of the realities that I'm confronted with.
Please hold on to your souls, dear listeners. Please hold on to your souls. Yeah. Good luck, everybody in San Fran.
That's right. It's really, if you want to like reinvigorate your soul and really be confronted with what's real, come to my area of San Francisco. People ask me all the time, like, why would you choose like my home in Australia is paradise? Why would you choose to live there? And I'm like, you know what? When I hear the screams of the streets through my loft windows as I write my next body of work in San Francisco, I'm really reminded what it's all about, what it's all for. The honest struggle is deep in my soul.
Yeah. This is the definition of keeping it real. Yeah.
Totally. And artists are connected to that. People think artists are crazy for wanting to, they have a torturedness in their soul. But there's something to that. Yes, some artists are taking it way too far, but when you struggle for something, it is an act of love and devotion and reverence. If it was always easy, what meaning does it have?
It doesn't. I'm with you. I think that's for everybody. Like my biggest memories, my most beautiful memories came after struggle.
Yeah.
I don't want to spend the rest of my life like with Sisyphus just pushing the rock up the hill. But man, there's nothing like getting that book mailed to you, holding it and knowing like I put 12 months of my fucking soul in here. There's nothing like winning the race or finishing the marathon or getting your black belt or riding the wave that you've paddled your ass off for. I think that will innately be human forever. And if there is the divide where I can just close my eyes and win the Olympics because of VR, I'm sorry, I'm too old. I'm going to go out in the woods and climb a tree or something.
Throw my iPhone out and
try to fight a bear.
I saw this guy out at Stinson Beach on the weekend who had this old school sailing boat that was like anchored on the beach, and he was like rough and smoking a cigarette. Looked like he had been out at sea for like 20 years. I was coming to shore for the first time in this boat. And everyone was like, as they were walking past, he was at the middle of this public beach and he just like anchored up there. Everyone was like looking and like taking photos. And I just had this moment of like, wow, like it is so rare for people to see something so raw. It's a spectacle for people. They're like, and they didn't know how to talk to him. They're taking photos on the camera, they're talking to each other. And I was like, this is anthropological perspective. This is really interesting. People are so fascinated, but it's so alien. And I think that fascination is because there's this wild, adventurous soul, I think, in all of us that just wants to be free. And when we look for that freedom inside the quick fix, inside the convenience, the irony is it traps us even more. It's through the exposure to what life really is in all of its colors that we can free our soul.
Yeah.
I've loved this so much. I want to give an opportunity to talk about the future. We've talked a lot about where we've been and where things are now. And with all of this considered, what's Trav's dream? What's the uncivilized man's kind of dream for where this goes over the next 3 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years?
I want every man on the planet to know there's another way. And I think that is the paradigm I've put forward. And whether the branding stays and it's called Uncivilized or it's called something else, I don't care. I don't care about any of that. I want every guy to know that innately the power they feel and the drive that they feel is okay. And the responsibility that they hold, that they need to adopt, is not a weight. It's actually an honor. It's with reverence that I get to go, oh, I do understand the feminine to the best of my ability. I am here to actually be dangerous, but not a danger. It's a privilege to say, let me walk among you and have you feel safer. I want every guy to fucking adopt that. And I think the biggest thing, Nicole, I run so many programs that have different ideas like, hey, you're a nice guy, in quotes, we'll unnice you. Hey, you don't have connection to your head, heart, and balls, we'll get you that. hey, we'll teach you how to make money. We'll teach you how to have a different paradigm of sex. And here, the number one thing that guys come back to me with that makes me like secretly know I'm on track is when they say, you know what I got out of this program? I actually now have male friends. And I'm like, fuck yeah. I did my job here. I don't care how we branded it. I don't care what we sold you. If that's it, if you didn't get the thing that we sold you, but that's what you got, your life will now be radically different. I think that is my dream, is that the isolation in men goes away, that the compartmentalization, the competition between men, that we actually bind together and say, hey, when we're together, we can do extraordinary things. Number one, we need to heal. I've worked with so many men now, as I've told you in the opener, that the stories they tell me of what they've lived through, what they've seen, and what has happened to them just almost knocks me over. And they now have an option. There is a societal opening that says, we see that and we invite you to heal. And whether that's with a group of men, whether that's a group of women, mostly with a group of men or mix, like that's available to you. And we need you. We may not need you to fucking stand on the front of the house with the spear protecting the lion. We don't need your paycheck, but we need you. We need your art. We need your gift. We need your space holding. We need your soul. So don't you dare leave us. Don't you dare let it be acceptable for you to drink yourself, smoke yourself, whatever yourself to death. Don't you dare drop out. We need you. Come join us. Be a part of us. I want to celebrate men. I want men to feel celebrated for the good that they do. And then I want men to turn their own eyes to their brothers and say, hey, you can do better. Hey, that's not okay with me, what you just did. We need to be the ones. My goal, my mission is to have men being the standard holders for other men. I see it, Nicole. I see it happening. And when it does happen, it's like, good, that guy's life will never be the same.
Yeah.
Right? We are, the brotherhood idea is, it's a big word. I'm a gym rat. I grew up having older guys like teach me how to lift, or be like, hey man, before you try to like drown yourself with a 135-pound bench press, which we all know you're just going to like be screaming in a second, let us spot you. Hey, you did great. Good job. Like that kind of thing needs to come back together, as opposed to the hyper masculine toxic bullshit of like, let's fuck all
you can't bench 135 pounds. Loser.
No. All the way down the line, that every guy gives respect to other men for whatever role that they play. I think when that happens, when we have reverence for ourselves and each other, then we'll be able to have far easier reverence for the feminine and for the planet and for animals and for the environment and for all the things that we're not quite there yet with. So that's really my big picture vision, is that the tide of the men changes, and it changes healthily, because you know what? We're not doing good for ourselves. But yet we're sitting here screaming like, hey, how come things aren't changing? I'm like, bro, how come you're not changing? So there's a permission piece, there's an education piece, there's an acceptance piece, and there's a togetherness piece. Like, let's make men relational. That's my mission. Yeah.
I have truly loved this conversation. I can honestly say from the depth of my heart, I think it's one of the deepest I've dropped in filming, recording the Global Affair. Maybe because it's a very close topic to my heart as well. But I'm sure your presence and your manhood has allowed for that depth of conversation to emerge. So I'm acknowledging you. Yeah, in that. And Trav, I can almost hear the thoughts of all of the men who are listening to this asking, how can I go deeper into this work? And so I'd love you to share how they can get connected to the amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you. And thank you. Thank you for the interview. I truly appreciate it, for your time and your space and your presence. Guys, get your hands on my book. Get your hands on Man Uncivilized. I wrote it for men. I designed it for men. I can't tell you how many men have said to me every morning, I just pick it up, I pick a random chapter, I read it, and it helps me. Find me, find my podcast, the Uncivilized Podcast. I'm on Instagram at Traver Boehm, Traver Boehm. If you Google anything Uncivilized, you'll most likely find me. I do workshops. I work with guys. I do mentoring. I have a team. I have a brilliant team. There's like nowhere we won't go. We just got invited actually to go to Africa to speak to like a group of leaders there about like, hey, men there aren't doing okay either. We're like, no shit, like take us anywhere. We will do this work. Yeah, please just reach out to me. If something here grabbed you, email me, traver@manuncivilized.com. I love hearing from people. Like, hey, this idea inspired me. Hey, this idea turned me off. Hey, I disagree with you on that. I'm open to all of it and want to simply be in a position of service to connect men, to help men, to support men, and to support the women who are supporting men as well.
We will drop all of those links, and I can't encourage the men enough, and also the women that maybe want to understand more deeply how to support the men in their life to engage. And we always encourage all of our listeners to reach out to our guests if there was something that shifted a paradigm for them or something that they deeply appreciated. So hopefully you hear from the Love Out Louders around the world.
Please.
Trav, thank you. Thank you for listening, my friend. If you enjoyed the show, please let us know by leaving a review or sharing the episode with someone you love and expanding this conversation as far and wide as possible. If you're looking for a community to have conversations with about global affairs, please jump in our Telegram group or join our free think tanks. Thanks for being a part of the shift towards a love-based civilization. We'll see you in the Telegram group or in the next episode.